A look at domestic architecture, which will be a major concern of this book, illustrates the universalist trend in cultures. Houses have been in the past very much location-bound in design. An African hut would have been perfectly unsuitable in Sweden. The climate has, of course, been a major factor in design. But if one considers not only the house, but the whole building culture, one sees that economic plants and animals have been equally important. A Swedish farm built by a culture that includes no cow would have been much different from one that did include a cow. Likewise, a Swedish farm built by a culture whose location was a treeless area would of necessity look different from one in a forest. The differing demands of climate, vegetation, and animal life resulted in endless variation in domestic architecture, and it is no surprise that the structures that resulted shared a certain unity with the systems that supported them. In a large part of the modern world, that unity has been broken. In the first place, house has been separated from other kinds of buildings. In this specialization of geographic areas, one area becomes all people and another area all cows, a situation much more acceptable to cows than to people, but not safe for either. In the second place, even climate has been substituted as a major criterion for design. With sufficient energy for heating, cooling, humidifying, and dehumidifying, the same house can now be survived in Sweden and Africa. This new freedom from geographic restraints, no doubt, has its good points, e.g. creativity can reign. Like many of the new technologies that make this new freedom possible, however, the very possibility of creativity as a satisfying human standard has not yet been tested out. In fact, there is much evidence to indicate that the potential we have of creativity in home building is not appreciated, and rather a strict tradition sorely missed. And so we have the modern American home. We all know what it looks like. In the absence of traditional commands, has it been produced by rationality or creativity? No, there it stands. Its only remaining outbuilding, the garage, a blend of inappropriate cultures, rationally designed, if for anything, only to make a consumer out of the resident in order to maintain the imbalance of his incomprehensibly widespread economic and social unit, and thereby to keep that unit growing. By now, my reader may be wondering why this long digression, and what all this has to do with the problem of the individuals taking action against the process of centralization. So I will gradually try to return to that point. Considering all the transculturalization of the most recent centuries, and especially the cultural standardization and centralization that is emanating out of the USA, where do we stand culturally? Do we have the best culture ever? Have we accumulated the best and discarded the worst of cultures of the past? Has our boasted melting pot produced a refined product, or has it fused exquisitely wrought gold pieces to make a single ingot like Pizarro did? The question, of course, depends on the judge, the sentence. If survival be the judge, we must conclude that we have been the fittest so far, because our culture has in fact survived, while many others have been destroyed. A reasonable argument, however, could be fielded that far from having the best culture, we have in fact no culture at all. But let's assume that we do have the best. There is a more ominous question. Do we have increasingly one culture? Is cultural variety in the world going down? Is the cultural gene pool shrinking? If the answer is yes, as to me it obviously is, then we are indeed standing on shaky ground. All our cultural eggs are in one basket. Change the metaphor there. If this one culture proves unadaptable to our natural limits, then we have nothing else. It is genetically a suicidal state. A gene pool's strength is in its diversity. Do not make the mistake of thinking that because there are more transcultural marriages every day that our cultural gene pool is widening. Rather, through this process of blending, it is narrowing. In the past, I have clung very doggedly to the ethic of universalism, and I thought happily of a future time when all barriers between people would be dropped. Now I attribute those sentiments to two things: a lack of understanding of what cultural identity really was, and masked cultural imperialism. Since it is an assumption of this book that the American way of life, quote unquote, is failing psychologically and ecologically, and that the quote unquote American way of life has progressively eliminated alternatives for itself, the question once again arises: what can the individual do? Part of the answer is he's in very serious trouble because he is culturally practically defenseless. Cultures function as carriers of an incredible amount of information, something which will come out later as we try to make a computer model of the information normally carried by a building culture. I have Wedge's paradigm here. Information like the details of milking a cow, how much grain to plant, how large a haymow to build, how many acres can one man weed, etc. As the decentralists drop out or start the work of rebuilding, as we do it as cultural children. Most of the information our culture has been carrying, like so much of its fixed capital, for us will prove useless. Our situation is still worse. Where can we look for cultural guidance? The most natural place to look is in the past. Perhaps the cultures of our great-grandfathers will serve for us if all the king's horses and all the king's men can put them back together again. But the unfortunate answer is that their cultures will not do. Time has not stood still, and our culture has not been inactive. In the past 3 generations of men, the population of the world has soared, which has reduced each of our parts of the world accordingly. Furthermore, with the passing of cultures, many of the systems which supported them have passed. For example, the local farmers market. No, we cannot ignore the past 200 years. And if we try, they will almost certainly catch up to us in land taxes or squatters. So the answer I offer to the question of why is it so hard to withdraw our support from the centralized structures around us is that we no longer have the alternative cultures necessary. The proposition of this book is that, like so many other cultural phenomena, the cultures of domestic architecture have been so hopelessly bastardized and standardized in the last 200 years that they no longer perform even their function of aesthetic satisfaction or relief from decision-making. If this state of things is accepted as fact, to be sure we will bemoan it, but we can also make use of it by making the present a period of cultural redesign. It may be a unique chance in history for rationality to make deep inroads into cultures due to culture's unique weakness. Hopefully, the result could be that in another 100 years or so, after the failure of this experiment in centralized culture, as human-scaled, quote-unquote, cultures begin to recrystallize out of this supersaturated solution, these present inroads of rationality may make possible very satisfactory lifestyles, measured by the criteria we design for, be these leisure time, material security, economic identity, simple survival, or whatever. A possible stopping point. It says here, and the cat has come to tell me, right there is probably a good place to stop for now. Roger, he wants fed. Bye for now.